CGTN, China Global Television Network.
President Xi Jinping arrives to a great welcome in the DPRK for a state visit. Chief prosecutor at The Hague calls for Bashir to stand trial. And more than 70 million people displaced by war and violence. Hello everyone, welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrie Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. In business news, 5 African banks to contribute nearly $400 million towards a new diamond mining vessel in Namibia. And in sports, a rollout of the new ticketing system gets mixed reviews ahead of the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations opening match. Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in the capital of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. This is the first visit by a Chinese head of state in 14 years. Over the next 2 days, President Xi will meet with the nation's leader Kim Jong-un to discuss their country's relationship. This year marks 70 years of diplomatic ties, and officials say they will look for ways to strengthen them in a new era. President Xi will also visit Pyongyang's Friendship Tower, a symbol of the bond between the two neighbors. Now, many in South Korea are closely watching President Xi's trip. CGTN's Jack Button reports some see it as a critical opportunity to restart long-stalled nuclear talks.
China's President Xi Jinping's visit to Pyongyang coincides with the 70th anniversary of diplomatic ties between China and the DPRK.
Our main aim is to make solidarity between two countries.
But President Xi made it clear in a DPRK state media op-ed that he would also seek to promote a political settlement on the Korean Peninsula issue.
China wanted to influence North Korea in a positive way, that North Korea changed its strategic decision to resume the negotiation with the United States earlier.
Denuclearization diplomacy stalled after a summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump ended without either willing to concede ground last February.
President Xi's visit could mark the start of a renewed diplomatic push here on the Korean Peninsula, with South Korea's leader Moon Jae-in saying he also plans to hold talks with Xi at the G20 summit in Osaka, after which US President Donald Trump will also visit South Korea.
Many South Koreans remain optimistic about the path towards denuclearization despite the slow progress so far.
Nuclear program, they have a very huge program. So about 10 or more 10 years will be needed. So step by step is the only realistic way.
The office of South Korean President Moon Jae-in welcomed Xi's trip to Pyongyang as a potential step towards reviving discussions aimed at peace and stability on the peninsula. Jack Barton, CGTN, Seoul.
China and the DPRK share a border and a long history that can be seen through their culture and art. CGTN's Guan Yang met with artists in the border city of Dangong.
Chinese collector Sun Yong has dedicated 12 years to working with top artists from around the DPRK. He has never stopped looking for the finest pieces. Over 90% of his collection comes from the neighboring country, and he often invites DPRK painters coming to Dandong to paint.
The traditional friendship with China has always been a popular subject of their art pieces, since most of the DPRK's meritorious artists underwent hardships during the Korean War, and you can feel the emotions in their work.
After years of sanctions, Dandong isn't the kind of bustling cross-border trade hub it used to be. However, areas like culture and people-to-people exchanges have changed little compared to trade in minerals, arms, and luxury goods. In Sun's gallery, He hopes that the visit by President Xi can further facilitate cross-border cultural activities.
At the moment, I think culture remains one of the few options we have to communicate and work with our neighbor. In recent years, cultural activities with the DPRK have become more dynamic. Together, we should keep up this good work.
During President Xi's visit, both sides will exchange views and push for new progress in political resolution of the Korean Peninsula issues. Moreover, China vows to play a positive role in realizing denuclearization on the peninsula. In terms of the UN sanctions, which still haven't been lifted, one expert offers proposals.
China, as the permanent member of the UN Security Council, must fulfill its duty in imposing sanctions on the DPRK. But cross-border activities with the DPRK, which are not banned by the UN, can be further promoted and serve as the main channel for boosting bilateral cooperation.
China's relations with DPRK were once described by Chairman Mao as close as lips and teeth. Now, after 70 years of diplomatic ties, both countries are willing to take their friendship higher.
President Xi Jinping made his remarks to the local media in the DPRK, calling for long-term and healthy development which will benefit both countries. He also called for further cooperation in areas like education, culture, tourism and sports, a promising sign for people on both sides of the Yalu River. Guanyang, CGTN, Dandong.
The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Fatou Bensouda, wants Sudan's ousted President Omar al-Bashir transferred to The Hague for mass killings in the Darfur region. Bensouda argues that the political situation in Sudan presents an opportunity to address the impunity that has plagued Darfur. Bashir is wanted by the International Criminal Court on charges of crimes against humanity committed in Darfur between 2003 and 2008. He has denied the charges. The court issued warrants for his arrest in 2008 and in 2010.
The circumstances have changed dramatically. The former status quo is over. Mr. Omar al-Bashir has been deposed, arrested, detained, and charged with domestic offenses. Two other suspects in the Darfur situation, Messrs. Abdel Rahim Hussein and Ahmed Haroun, are also reportedly detained in Khartoum. Sudan remains under a legal obligation to transfer these suspects to the ICC to stand trial unless it can demonstrate to the judges of the ICC that it is willing and able to genuinely prosecute them for the same cases.
Sudan is not a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and as you know, the court is not an organ of the United Nations. Despite the change of the political situation in Sudan, the court remains unchanged. It is the same in terms of statute and practice. Therefore, our position remains the same. Al-Bashir will be presented to a fair trial before the national judiciary, and it has been announced that the trial will begin next week. This emphasizes the willingness and the ability of the national judiciary to achieve justice and to combat impunity.
Moving to Nigeria now, where a recent wave of attacks by Boko Haram insurgents and ISIL affiliates in West Africa is sparking fears of a resurgence, despite claims by Nigeria's military that the group has been severely degraded. The latest of such attacks is Sunday's multiple suicide attacks, killing dozens in Borno State. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has more in the following report.
Triple suicide bomb attacks have killed 30 people and injured at least 40 others in Konduga, a small town some 25 kilometers south of Maiduguri, the capital of Borno. Sunday's attack broke a spell of no suicide attacks in the area since April this year. No one has claimed responsibility, but a faction led by Abubakar Shakau is known to operate in the southern part of Borno State. The group is also known to rely on children to carry out suicide attacks. The UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, says 2 girls and a boy carried out the attacks. In total, 5 children have been used to carry out suicide attacks this year, compared to 40 last year. It is a marked fall in the use of children as suicide attackers, but the group is said to have devised new conscription tactics to recruit more children into their ranks.
They also pay money, from what we hear, to have that kind of support from members of the society who are economically deprived and need the money. The fourth one, the final one, is where they use psychosocial means to convince young people and women to support some of these actions. So in other words, they give the impression that women are not being regarded in the society. So they convince them that if they do this, they are going straight to paradise, or whatever kind of stories they tell them.
But in what appears to be a resurgence of Boko Haram, the group is not just wreaking havoc in southern Borno state. The insurgents have kept the Nigerian military fully engaged on two major front lines. In the south of Borno, the Shekau-led faction launched repeated attacks. In the northern parts, ISIL affiliates led by Musa al-Barnawi has also been in constant confrontation with the army. Some reports suggest that the insurgents have been overrun by some 20 military bases in those areas in the past months, and they seem to be on a path to regain territories.
The leader of IS at the global level, that's al-Baghdadi, actually issued a statement where he called on jihadists to come to the aid of their brothers in the West African sub-region, which may suggest why we're seeing an increase in the membership of this group. Now, what has happened is that some of these new members are coming with new technology that they've acquired from places like Libya, Iraq, and Syria. Some of them are also coming with weapons that they are bringing into Nigeria. And then lastly, we're also seeing perhaps an increase in funding.
Boko Haram is blamed for killing tens of thousands since the group began its violent campaign in 2009. President Buhari has made defeating the group his top priority, but various observers claim that he has only succeeded in eradicating them, while defeating them has remained an elusive dream. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
The joint high-level mission of the United Nations and the European Union is in the West African nation of Mali for a 3-day visit. It is led by Jean-Pierre Lacroix, who is the UN Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations, and Pedro Serrano, who is the EU Deputy Secretary General for Common Security. The objectives of the joint visit is to engage with Malian authorities and other key stakeholders on ways to enhance support by the United Nations and the European Union to accelerate the implementation of the peace agreement and the restoration of state authority in northern and central Mali. The delegation will meet with government authorities at the highest level, signatory armed groups, political actors, civil society, women groups, and international partners.
It's a joint visit of the European Union and the United Nations to express our condolences and our solidarity with the Malian authorities and the Malian people after what happened to them. We tell them that we are on their side to do the utmost to promote the return of peace and stability to the center and to the north of Mali, and also to support the United Nations and European Union who are on the ground.
We have come here to express our solidarity in these times which are difficult. We are long-term partners. We are working hand in hand with the European Union and the United Nations to try and help Mali and the whole country of the Sahel, in particular G5, to consolidate stability in the region and to move forward in development.
To Egypt now, where the country is set to host the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations. But security remains a concern. The country is still scarred by attacks, and with the death of former President Mohamed Morsi this week, the threat of further attacks are becoming stronger. So how much of a threat does Morsi's death pose on the competition? Details with our correspondent in Cairo, Adel Mahrour.
Liwa al-Thawra and Hasm are two terrorist organizations believed to be the armed wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. Both groups have released statements threatening vengeance against the Egyptian authorities for Morsi's death. Analysts believe the African Cup of Nations, set to begin on Friday, could be a target.
Any big event like the AFCON could be an opportunity for terrorist organizations to attack. They'd want to show by any means that security is fragile. A violent reaction from the Muslim Brotherhood is a possibility. It has two armed groups. Both have seen massive crackdowns from the police. I believe they have become incapable of holding any big attack. Still, the notion is possible.
Usually, any terrorist plot is directed at security personnel. No major event Egypt hosted has been previously attacked. Still, Cairo doesn't want to take any risk.
There is a nationwide high security alert, more so in 4 cities hosting the matches. Security forces have already been preparing for any possible terrorist attack, even before Morsi's death. Their plan hasn't changed much. The Interior Ministry has already been holding preemptive operations against terror cells' suspected hideouts.
Egypt is hosting the first 24 teams African Cup of Nations. The competition is the biggest in terms of teams, fans and media coverage. The country's reputation is at stake here, so it won't allow anyone to tamper with the success or the security of that event. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. More than 70 million people displaced in war and violence. And insecurity in the DR Congo hampers a response to a measles outbreak.
Economic data out of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
It's World Refugee Day today. Nations around the world are honoring the courage and determination of those uprooted by war, violence and persecution. However, this year's June 20th will be marked by the highest number of forcibly displaced people since the Second World War. Ethiopia currently hosts the highest number of new displacements globally. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
The number of people who have been forcibly displaced has reached record numbers. Each day, an average of 37,000 are forced to flee their homes. But it isn't richer nations in the West that bear the brunt of the world's refugee crisis.
Ethiopia has, with 1.5 million more displaced, added to this horrific number of more than 70 million refugees and internally displaced in the world now because of war and conflict and the violence. That's the highest number since the Second World War.
Ethiopia has the highest number of new displacements globally. In Africa, the country is host to the second largest refugee population after Uganda. The majority come from 3 places: South Sudan, Somalia, and Eritrea.
The North is failing. 16% of refugees are now hosted by the rich world. It's the poorest of countries, it's those who are developing who are now shouldering the major burden.
Ethiopia has a strong track record of welcoming refugees. However, these new levels of displacement are stretching resources to the brink.
Some of the worst conditions I've seen as an aid worker in my entire life as a humanitarian. More than 20 people per little cubicle in an old industrial area. There isn't even a steady flow of food. We got fresh water to them. That's the only thing that is functioning there. There are 200 people per latrine.
In January, the Ethiopian government passed a law that allows refugees the right to work and obtain other legal documents. Hopefully, these historic changes will allow refugees to integrate and contribute back to their new societies. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Uganda is observing the World Refugee Day with a call for more investment in communities that host refugees. The UN Refugee Agency says this will ease pressure on host communities and help refugees become self-reliant. As Isabel Nakiria reports from Kampala, one woman is giving Congolese tailors space in her workshop to earn some money and cope in the city.
Lucho Marzambi is sewing his life back together. 2 years ago, he was struggling to make ends meet in Kampala as a Congolese refugee. He's now the lead tailor at this workshop.
I couldn't even earn enough for myself. I was like a child that has to wait to be fed. But now I am more self-reliant. I can afford to rent a house, and I can provide for my family.
Lucho fled fighting from Goma in the eastern DRC. He lived in a church in Kampala for almost a year while learning how to sew in nearby shops. Lucho's good skills in making African fabric earned him a job here. He's also helped recruit other Congolese refugee tailors, and together they've helped Sawi grow her business. Sawi says she wants to improve the lives of refugees.
Given that we all know how Congolese tailors are good, they have a background in good African fashion, and it's what I deal with. So I was able to work with a few first, and I realized there's a niche and there's so many people who are Congolese tailors, they lack jobs.
The UN Refugee Agency has made an appeal for $900 million to help address the needs of refugees in Uganda. But Lucho and about 100,000 other refugees living in the city will miss out. Uganda's laws only allow aid to go to the refugees living in settlements. Despite this, Lucho doesn't want to go back to the DRC.
I am now working. I do not have anything troubling me. But in Congo, things are unpredictable. It can be good now, and by evening, there is fighting, and you have to run for your life.
Uganda has left its doors open to refugees despite the financial burden. The country hosts Africa's biggest refugee population, with over 1 million refugees living here. And refugees like Lucho have had to work hard to be able to iron out their problems. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
And here in Kenya, the Dadaab refugee camp is home to at least 250,000 people. In the largest of the 3 camps, which make up Dadaab, a group of refugees have joined forces with the locals to set up a profitable farming venture. Wilkista Nyabwa tells us more.
In a sunny patch in a refugee camp in Kenya's north, a farm is thriving. Onions and tomatoes and watermelon and okra are ripe for harvest. They are favorites in households here and sell fast. The farm is a boon to the farmers. Most are refugees in Dadaab refugee camp, one of the largest in the world. The farm is in Hagadera, the biggest of 3 camps located in Garissa, a county in Kenya's north. This is a semi-arid area where the earth is parched. But the locals and the refugees have discovered a way to coax life out of the earth. Most people here know Abdi Mohamed Aden as Pili Pili, Swahili for pepper, after the produce he sells. He started farming using skills he learned in his native Somalia.
I arrived in 1992 from Somalia and have been farming for over 20 years, relying on rainfall and running surface water.
A section of refugees and locals came together and set up a farm in a little corner. They use solar energy to pump water from the borehole and irrigate the land. The Kenya Red Cross Society and the United Nations High Commission are among the organizations which have bolstered the farmers' efforts.
We noted that some of the seeds that they were using were not very productive, so we bought for them hybrid seeds.
The increased yield has improved the refugees' fortunes.
All members play an active role in the farm. Some take the produce to the market, some sell, some cultivate, and some guard the farm. Every evening we come together and split whatever we make.
Each group member earns about $430 every 3 months. Dadaab refugee camp is home to over 200,000 refugees, most from Somalia. A section had been here since 1991, when the civil war broke out in Somalia. This year, there were reports that Kenya planned to shut the 3-decade-old camp by August. In the face of this uncertainty, the farm is more than just a livelihood, it is a refuge.
We are building the capacity of the people, both refugee and host community, to cope on their own. So the support that is given to them is like development approach. Somebody who has been trained on agriculture, even if he goes back across to Somalia, is someone who has the knowledge of agriculture, and therefore they can be able to do agriculture on their own.
In a country away from home, this farm provides a place for these refugees to cultivate their dreams. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN, Kenya.
Let's now go to Mauritania, where Thursday marks the final day of campaigns for presidential elections to be held on Saturday. The polls mark the country's first democratic transition of power through the ballot box. President Mohamed Ould Abdel Aziz is standing down after serving 2 5-year terms. There are a total of 6 presidential candidates. The front-runner, a former general, Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, is an ally of President Aziz. His main challenger is opposition candidate Sidi Mohamed Ould Abubakar. A second round of elections may be planned for the 5th of July should no candidate receive more than 50% of the vote.
I will help disadvantaged populations, especially workers and peasants, by lowering the prices of essential materials, increasing wages, and adopting a number of measures that all benefit our populations.
In Guinea-Bissau, President José Mario Vaz has rejected a proposal by Parliament for his rival and former premier to lead the next government. The move extends the political deadlock gripping the West African country since 2015. 4 years ago, Vaz fired Domingos Simios Pereira from his prime minister's position. The president had invited the PAIGC party, which controls a majority in parliament, to name a new prime minister as a way to end the crisis, but he rejected the ruling party's repeated proposal of Pereira. Vaz has set the date for the next presidential election for November 24th. The West African nation has struggled with volatility for years. It has seen multiple coup attempts since independence from Portugal in 1973.
They expressed a feeling of dissatisfaction in the sense that the commitments made during their recent visit to Bissau are dragging. So we shared with the mission our reading of the situation. It is the same conclusion. We all know this.
La mission, notre lecture de la situation est la même conclusion de ce qu'on connaît depuis.
We mean it's a great shame. We are being instructed by other states on how to run our country. They are teaching us our own law. I hope this time we'll get it over with once and for all.
In Senegal, the first African summit on female genital mutilation and child marriage has concluded in the capital, Dakar. The summit focused on strategies to eradicate these traditional practices by 2030. CGTN's Laura Walubengo has more.
Leaders from at least 20 countries in Africa and the rest of the world attended the summit. Discussions highlighted the plight of girls in Africa, promoting an accelerated implementation of a zero-tolerance policy on FGM and child marriage by 2030.
To end female genital mutilation across the world, across Africa, partnership very important. Governments need to lead by introducing laws, policies, and put in place programs that are financed using domestic resources.
With 76.3%, Niger has the highest rate of child marriage in Africa. To end this, there is a mechanism that has been implemented with an action plan to combat child marriage.
Islamic law, known as fatwa, has been adopted in efforts to reinforce the bridge between Africa and the rest of the world.
Le point culminant de ce sommet, on peut le dire.
The culmination of this summit is the declaration of the fatwa. We all know that the foundation of female genital mutilation is of religious and cultural origin. The fatwa that was declared today by the Vice Imam of the Great Mosque of Al-Azhar in Egypt is the essential point of this summit, but also the commitment of activists and the leaders who took part in the meeting.
As a survivor, I think that female genital mutilation and child marriage will not be stopped by Westerners. We Africans should confront this problem head-on for total eradication.
According to UNICEF, more than 200 million women and girls continue to suffer the effects of FGM in Africa and the world, with more than 50 million others at risk of becoming victims by 2030. Although the prevalence of FGM is declining in several countries, great resistance continues to be witnessed in several others, such as Somalia, Guinea, Djibouti and Mali. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
On to Somalia now, and the U.S. government has announced millions of dollars in aid for aid agencies after reopening its humanitarian offices in the Horn of African nation. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo now reports on what the latest contribution means to the country's recovery progress.
The administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Mark Green, made the pledge in his latest visit to Mogadishu. The announcement also coincided with the relocation of the U.S. aid offices in Mogadishu for the first time in almost 3 decades.
We open this mission because the people of Somalia and the leadership of Somalia have shown a commitment to pursuing a more citizen-centered, more resilient, and more self-reliant future. Today I am announcing $185 million in humanitarian assistance here to provide life-saving food, water, and health care to Somalis in need.
Somali Prime Minister Hassan Ali Khaire attended the event and urged more foreign missions to reopen offices in his country, citing security and recent financial reforms made under his leadership.
Relations between Somalia and the U.S. has improved in the past years due to close cooperation and reforms we have made in the fields of financial reforms and security. It's my hope that other foreign embassies and missions will follow suit and reopen their offices in Somalia.
The latest aid package comes amid concerns of a worsening food crisis in parts of the country, with delayed rainfall recorded in most areas. Aid agencies warned that an estimated 3.4 out of 4.2 million people have been affected by conflict, climatic shocks and displacement in recent years. China, the United States alongside other countries have pumped in millions of dollars to avert famine in Somalia, as conflict, climatic shocks continue to uproot more families from their regions. Last week, China provided humanitarian aid worth millions of dollars to the government and the UN World Food Programme that will target vulnerable families and school-going children.
Assistance will be used to support vulnerable Somali men and women and children with relief of food, healthy school meals, and specialist nutritious food for the prevention of malnutrition across the country.
Mogadishu and partner aid organizations have appealed for close to $1 billion to aid more than a third of the country's total population. Meanwhile, despite recent rainfall recorded in several regions of the country, experts warn that food insecurity will likely to remain a major challenge throughout the year. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
And your business news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. 5 African banks to contribute nearly $400 million towards a new diamond mining vessel in Namibia. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard shoots down a U.S. drone.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are 2 of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Five African commercial banks have partnered in a $375 million financing deal to build a new diamond mining vessel for a subsidiary of Anglo-American's diamond unit De Beers. Nedbank Namibia, RMB Namibia, Standard Bank, Absa and Bank Windhoek agreed to provide 80% of the funding for the ship, which will be the world's largest of its type. Dep Marine Namibia, a 50-50 joint venture company between De Beers and the government of Namibia, will provide the balance of $94 million. The ship, to be known as the AM-V3, will be the seventh in the Dep Marine Namibia joint ventures fleet, which mines high-quality diamonds from the ocean floor using high-tech surveying equipment. Nigeria's debt office says the country may issue Eurobonds if necessary to help finance its 2019 budget. The statement came a day after its head said no such move was planned. Foreign borrowing for the 2019 budget was set at $2.7 billion. The West African nation's plan is to first access any cheaper funding from multilateral and bilateral lenders. Thereafter, any balance will be raised from commercial sources, which may include security issuance such as Eurobonds. Nigeria, which emerged from recession last year, has borrowed abroad and at home over the past 3 years to help finance its budgets and to fund infrastructural projects. However, debt servicing costs continue to rise. The 5th annual meeting of the ID for Africa movement has kicked off in Johannesburg. This year's meeting is hosted by the South African Department of Home Affairs under the theme Identity Ecosystems for Service Delivery. Home Affairs authorities from across the continent are in attendance. Here's CGTN's Yolisa Njamela.
ID for Africa is an ID for all movement that accompanies African nations on their way to develop robust and responsible ID bionetworks around digital identity in the service of development, humanitarian action, security and facilitation. It is a tripartite with representations from African governments, development agencies and industry. This annual meeting has become an appropriate place for sharing experiences and best practices. The ID for Africa movement wants to continue to play a vital role in empowering the identity communities in Africa and encourage dialogue and knowledge sharing.
Our focus from the beginning has been on promoting dialogue and knowledge exchange within the identity community. We have done that and we continue to do that through several instruments. Large numbers of African government agencies testify to the important role these instruments play in their planning, decision-making, capacity-building efforts.
We believe that ID for Africa has a role to play in promoting transparent and responsible adoption of digital identity in various countries on the continent. Since its inception in 2014, this forum has developed the reputation of one that provides a platform for government agencies to develop expertise, to share experience, and to work at building capacity around the important subject of how digital identity can support a wide range of government services for citizens and for accelerating development broadly.
ID for Africa was motivated by the need to promote legal identity for all in Africa and to empower individuals to claim their rights and to benefit from the fruits of development.
One of the gaps that we do confront is the inadequate registration of those who come to find solace in our countries. We have been particularly inadequate in registering those who are asylum seekers or refugees.
Experts here acknowledged that this continent still faces steep challenges when it comes to issues of identification.
It is quite alarming that in this era of the fourth industrial revolution, we still have citizens on this continent of ours who are born, get married, and die without it ever being recorded anywhere. In essence, they never existed. ID for Africa exists so that together, in tandem, we move and where possible, accelerate our efforts to reach full registration for each and every citizen who exists on this African continent.
For the first time since its existence, the ID for Africa movement is being supported by representatives of international organizations. Yudis Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Ethiopia's flower industry is targeting new markets like China and India as it seeks growth. Currently, floriculture in Ethiopia is worth $200 million annually from exports. But that's just a third of what neighboring Kenya gets. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi visited a flower farm which is investing in the latest technology and positioning itself for business from China.
Less chemicals on plants and more environmentally friendly flower cuttings. 150 kilometers from the capital Addis Ababa is Florence's flower farm. As part of its business strategy, the farm is investing in biological pest control to stay competitive in the horticulture market.
We are releasing, that is the predators. It is eating the main pest insects. So we are controlling insect by insect. And also we are using fungus to kill as a parasitic and to kill the insects. So we are using mostly not the chemicals, we are using the biological control system.
Florence's is one of 5 companies in Ethiopia specializing in the beginning of the value chain by growing cuttings just for export. It is Europe's largest supplier of cut plants. Ethiopia's horticulture industry is about 15 years old but growing very fast. It has so far attracted over 130 international investors who are exporting to countries like Germany, Netherlands, Belgium and France. Ethiopia's flower exports, however, are still behind those from Kenya, while revenue is just a third of that of neighboring Kenya, which is why those in the industry are looking to expand into new markets.
We are ready to supply young plants to the Chinese market also. These are quality plants which have been tested in other markets. And China is definitely for us an opportunity. It will take some time and it will take some hard work to get into this market, but we're sure it will open up.
Flower experts, however, fear that there will be competition from China's existing small traditional flower producers.
China is also known to do everything by themselves. That's not bad, but at least it would be good to get into some partnership maybe, and also see what China can do, and then also don't let them make the mistakes which we all have made in the beginning, but directly start with a good way, get the good varieties there, get a good partnership.
But Ronald from Florence's believes that once a supply deal to China is achieved, growth will follow because of the availability of land to flower farmers in Ethiopia. The government has allocated over 12,000 hectares of land for horticulture investment. So with just over 11% of this land being cultivated, there is plenty of room for growth once new markets open up. Coletta Wanjohi for CGTN in Mojo in Ethiopia.
Iran has shot down a U.S. drone with a surface-to-air missile on Thursday, raising fears that a major military confrontation could erupt between Tehran and Washington in the Gulf. While the elite Revolutionary Guard said the American aircraft was brought down after flying into Iranian airspace, U.S. officials said the drone was in international territory at the time. Thursday's incident marks the first direct Iranian-claimed attack on U.S. assets after the U.S. imposed sanctions on Tehran earlier this year and increased military forces in the Gulf. The U.S. military has denied any of its unmanned aerial vehicles entered Iranian airspace. And we still have more news for you here in the program. Here's what's ahead. A Nigerian teenager uses locally available materials for unique inventions. We'll bring you the details when we return.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's now head to Nigeria, where a young boy's engineering talent is the talk of the neighborhood. He uses locally available materials to come up with outstanding creations. Here's Daniela Pearson with more on that story.
For a teenage boy, Hope Frank's raw engineering talent is simply breathtaking. This is a miniature excavator, which is manually controlled using syringes, plungers, and wires.
I like creation. I like people who are inventors. So I did the Yonzu practicum because from what I know, they said that inventors tried for many times and still failed. I did that, but I still failed. I did this for 1 year before I succeeded it.
The boy's creative ways have caught the attention of many people, including experts. They have been visiting him, bringing along gifts in the form of money and materials to help the boy scale up his engineering skills.
They tell me about this small boy. Say he's trying to fix the excavator. Something that I see for Europe, that I come see here. So I'm very, very grateful. I'm happy about this small boy.
Frank started fiddling with wires and electronic gadgets from a very young age. When he was only 5, he created a toy helicopter and a mini grader, simply by using old laptop batteries. He is currently working on a helicopter model that will be controlled by wireless remote. But there are challenges.
The materials here in Europe, you don't have such DC here in Akwa Ibom State, so you need to import it, create your account online to import the materials here. So my biggest challenge is money.
This teenage wonder dreams of working in a major international engineering company. He is perhaps halfway there, given his eye-catching creations. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. The rollout of new ticketing system gets mixed reactions ahead of the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations opening match.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
And we begin with football. With the launch of a new ticketing system ahead of the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations,